All right, welcome back, everyone. This panel is a very special treat. It has come up in a few of the other panels that cyber insurance is important. It's not just important, it's critical. It's the biggest part of every incident response in terms of the early, while you're trying to fight away and figure out about this attacker, somebody is in the room thinking, okay, what kind of insurance do we have and how do we even deal with the insurance? And usually very few people have the answers. So today, we've got with us three people who have those answers. That's who we brought to you, and I'm excited. I get to moderate. I get to be the moderator of this panel in addition to the other stuff that I'm doing here. So let's start off with Jennifer Coughlin. So many of us here share the common thread of not just being legal or compliance professionals, but we're also entrepreneurs because we'd be working in this practice area that's only recently had its genesis. But very few people here have taken that notion of entrepreneurism to its highest level. There's a couple, and one of them is our next panelist, Jennifer Coughlin. She is a partner and the founder of Mullen, which is a law firm exclusively dedicated to cyber, has been around for about 7.5 years with 115 professionals already in store. She's taking over the world, and that doesn't surprise me in one bit. She's not just a cyber expert. Her extraordinary experience providing first-party breach response and third-party privacy defense legal services is very unique. It's also that cyber-related work is all that her firm does. She's an extraordinary success, an incredible inspiration, and should be an inspiration for any of the newer practitioners in the field of IR at just how far your experience can take you if you have the will. What makes her perfect for this panel, she's also at the top of the list for insurers who, as a panel member for insurers who need a law firm for you to hire. So when you call your insurance company and you say, look, we need a law firm, they're going to say, most often, they'll give you a couple names, but they're going to say, go with Jennifer. And there's a good reason she's at the top of that list. She's Steve Jobs meets Jessica Jones meets the Bionic Woman. So welcome, Jennifer. So happy to have you here.
Thanks, John.
Well, next to Jennifer is Scott Goddess, who is the John Wick of cyber insurance battles. You will see from his bio that he's co-chair of Barnes & Thornburg's Data, Security and Privacy and Insurance Recovery and Consulting Groups, and he's helped his clients recover more than $1 billion, probably getting close to $2 billion by now. I don't know any other lawyer with this combo of leadership responsibilities. It's really quite something. Scott has really created this practice into an art form because he won't just help you fight with the insurance company if that's what you're doing. He won't just help you through that process. If the insurance company decides not to pay, then Scott will litigate that for you. And afterwards, he will, if you receive some sort of summary judgment motion or motion to dismiss because lawfully you're not entitled to this relief, he will take it to the circuit court and he will argue in the circuit court. It just doesn't happen that that a person can become an advisor and also a litigator and also an appellate lawyer. But Scott is all three. One of my favorite things that Scott does, which we work on a lot together, is just whenever a client says to me, hey, we need something in cyber, we need to figure this out, I go, well, the first thing you need to do is just have Scott come in, look at your insurance policy, and tell you the kind of things that you're missing. So he's perfect for that. He'll tell you what's great about your policy and what stinks about it. So welcome, Scott. Great to have you.
Thanks so much. Good to be back with you, John.
Yes, and great to see you, Scott. Joni Mason is our next and the third panelist we have here. She's a national practice leader, executive and professional liability solutions and claims at USI Insurance Services. So that's a mouthful. And she is not just a very seasoned lawyer, but also become a very seasoned insurance practitioner. So what happens when you call your insurance company and you're in a panic about a ransomware attack? You're sooner or later hopefully going to meet someone like Joni Mason, or lucky enough to have her in your corner. She runs claims at this powerhouse, USI Insurance Services, focusing on claims and recovery for victims. They work with clients to reduce cyber and privacy exposure through risk management, providing cyber risk transfer via private safe insurance coverage. She's also a force of nature She begins by reviewing your existing policies, your error and omissions policies, benchmarking current limits and retention. She's a real client advocate, which is a very unique situation within the insurance industry, which has all these different labels for practitioners. It's difficult to know who's in your corner and who's not. And she'll use these scanning tools to help clients get into improving their cyber risk profile as well. It's holistic. It's a Sentry-like approach to protection, and it makes Joni not just a problem solver, but also a sanctuary provider amid the chaos and the confusion and the panic. Her theme song should be "Lean on Me" because that's what her customers do. So welcome, Joni.
Thanks, John.
All right. Well, look, we're going to start this off with kind of a lightning round because cyber insurance is so complex. There's so many angles to it. It's getting super difficult to get, super difficult to maintain, super difficult to adhere to all of the compliance restrictions, to work out the pre-screening, to do it's just like when you want to get health insurance, you got to get a physical first. Well, cyber insurance requires a lot of the same, very intricate, and you need a lot of advocacy during this. So let's begin with more of a lightning round just so you can get to know our panelists, and hopefully you'll have some questions, and I'll be watching the chat and the questions while they're answering just to see if there's some way we can help you, because I want to interact with the audience. I'm so glad you're all here, and if there's something bothering you, let's put it to this panel and see if they can take it on. So here's the first question, and this one is let's start with Scott. What is the mistake you see companies make most often during the cyber insurance application and renewal process? Scott.
The most challenging thing is how the insurance industry is turning to their outside counsel to examine, drill down on, and really use application answers against the policyholder. So that if there's a question that's unclear and you're given the option of 2 radio buttons, yes, no, the best way of dealing with it, rather than saying, well, our view is that it means A, but there's a possibility the carrier thinks it's B, write an attachment and say, we think it means A, you think it means B, to just take the arrow out of the quiver of coverage counsel for the carrier at the time of a claim to say, well, you said this, but it really means that, or we meant something else. Take that argument away from them, give them information that they claim that they need at the time of application, and prevent the argument down the road.
Well, that is hugely challenging to do, given anybody tries to read their homeowner's policy or any other policy. It's impossible to figure out what you have and don't have covered. But what a great point. And also to know where the angle is, where the carrier might deny coverage is critical to understand that beforehand. So Joni, let's ask you the same question. What is a mistake you see companies make most often during the cyber application, during the renewal process? Again, the renewal process is pretty much every year, right? And it changes. So what do you see from your vantage point? Tell us.
So I think, you're exactly right. It gets reviewed every year in this space, right? Because there's changes every year. The exposures change every year. And I would say the biggest mistake is not starting early enough and connecting with your broker. They can go through the questions that they are seeing underwriters ask and just preparing and, making sure you're testing your incident response and internal systems. So I think that's the mistake, is not addressing it very early on and connecting with your broker on what's expected.
I agree. And I mean, what do you tell someone? How do you make sure they're going to be honest? And even though they're trying to be honest, I assume a lot of these mistakes are made in good faith, correct?
Yeah. And really to Scott's point as well, I think if there's any lack of clarity in the question, make sure that you just push back and ask questions. Make sure, if you don't understand the question, you reach out to your broker and you reach out to the underwriter and make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what's being asked and that the response is actually responsive to the question being asked.
And John, if I can jump in here to add into what everything Joni said was absolutely right. You made the comment of dishonest or trying or good faith. Carriers assert on a regular basis that particularly when they want New York law to apply, it doesn't matter if there was intent or intent to deceive or anything along those lines. They say if there was a mistake, and the premium or the terms would have changed based upon different information. That's it. No coverage for you. We rescind the policy. It's like you never bought it in the first place.
Tough. All right, let's turn to post-attack. Jen, let's start with you. What is the mistake you see most often when a company is managing cyber insurance issues in the aftermath of a ransomware account? So what do you see? You're out there. Do they assume that everything you're doing is covered? Tell us what you see.
Yeah, so this is just something that comes up with organizations, depending upon how they come to us. Sometimes they do not understand the insurance claim process. They haven't had the opportunity to talk to their carrier about exactly what that process is. When are we supposed to notify you? How are we supposed to notify you? What type of coverage do we have under the policy? Is the policy direct pay or reimbursement? What are the vendor requirements? What are the consents that are required? There's a lot of steps that are required by organizations to tap into the coverage that they purchased, and not understanding the process to do that before you experience an incident can make the incident response process even more challenging than it would already otherwise be.
What is ransomware the same as just any other cyber incident from your perspective when you get the call, or from an insurance perspective, or is this going to be a whole new paradigm for you?
Yeah, I think ransomware, you need to look at it in the context of the different types of events that an organization may face. And when looking at ransomware, an organization is going to need to understand, if they're considering ransom payment, what are the steps that they need to take to ensure that there is coverage for that payment? What type of documentation do they have to provide to the carrier as part of their proof of loss for that payment? What type of consents they have to obtain? What type of organizations they should be working with? Who's engaging those organizations? The sequence of contact to those organizations. There's a lot that's going to be happening in a ransomware matter, and you don't want an organization to come to us and say, we have insurance, but we haven't notified them yet, but we want to engage a vendor to pay the ransom and engage this forensic firm to do the investigation. There's a lot to unpack in just that small little fact snippet, because they have coverage for extortion payment? I don't know the answer to that question. Do they have to obtain the consent of the carrier before taking any steps regarding engagement, before reaching any decisions on payments? Those are all things that organizations should be working out with their carrier prior to experiencing an incident, looking at their incident response plan to make sure it aligns with what needs to happen with regard to the communications to the carrier, so that when they do have that event, they're just going to be better prepared to take steps that will hopefully not jeopardize the coverage that they spent good money on.
Well, what's the typical involvement and engagement of the carrier when you're making a ransomware payment?
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me.
Yeah, it depends. So not everyone operates the same, but there are some scenarios where you need to obtain consent from the carrier to engage in communications with the threat actor, engage in negotiations with the threat actor, consent to final payments or agree to final payments with the threat actor. There are other carriers where they just need to know what you're doing. But regardless of what that carrier wants, organizations need to know what that want is, what that requirement is under the policy, so that they're doing what they need to do, so that they, again, aren't jeopardizing any coverage that they may have.
Joni, you're nodding your head. Is that your experience as well? Because the ransomware payment process, it's very challenging. When I try to explain it to my students, everybody says, how can anybody be making these payments? But they are, and sometimes insurance is covering those payments. So how does an insurance company, how do you manage that kind of situation?
Well, first, I 100% agree with everything Jennifer said. And like, most important thing is having the conversation and knowing what your policy requires in advance, well in advance of any time you have an event. One of the biggest issues that I see from our clients' perspective and post-attack is that jeopardizes coverage is not utilizing pre-approved vendors that the insurance carrier will require. So most cyber insurance policies will provide you a list of pre-approved vendors, pre-approved counsel, pre-approved breach counsel, and they're pretty strict about that. And that is something that the clients really need to have a good handle on. We try to go through that with our clients, at the renewal process and at the, engagement process, so that they have that information before an event ever happens. Because what I do see from the carriers that jeopardizes coverage is, these events, ransomware events, they're it's a crisis mode, and the company's in a crisis mode, so they act, and you've got the risk manager that may know about the pre-approved vendors, but maybe the IT department doesn't know about that, and not using a carrier approved vendor and incurring costs can jeopardize coverage for costs that would otherwise be covered under the policy.
Yeah, that's a bad move. What happens in that situation, Scott, when you you remember how many vendors there are, right? Because you've got forensic examiners, you've got law firms, you've got remediation, you've got the payment firm. How do you even figure out whether you're covered on all of those people? Plus, you need other kinds of experts, and maybe you've got business interruption issues. How do you manage that?
So you're trying to figure all that out on a remarkably accelerated time frame. The threat actors don't usually say, well, tell us in a month whether you want to pay or not pay, and your business is down. So everyone's trying to act most quickly. Ideally, your insurance carrier and the adjuster says right away, okay, look, we do have coverage for ransomware, and we will approve you to work with this law firm, this forensics firm, whatever it is. If it's a circumstance where the policyholder did not use somebody by going in advance, a lot of times the policies say, hey, you have to tell us after a certain period of time or within a certain period of time. And you can say, well, I'm telling you within a certain period of time, I use someone to mitigate my losses right away. But the carriers nonetheless have the expectation and the mindset, whether it's correct or not, it's another story, that you'll work with their people and that they get to control everything. If a policyholder picked its own people to mitigate the situation, they quite frequently will face an adjuster who says, well, I didn't approve these people, so the best I'm going to do for you is to give you, and then they'll say the cheapest rates they can think of for people that they've assigned for matters, once or twice or whatever it might be. And so I know this was a company threatening event. I know you went with the best because you thought that you had to, and I'm going to give you the rate of, and it's going to be significantly lower.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, do you take that rate and say, okay, well, it's better than zero? Or do you take that rate and say, how can I have a dispute about it? How can I fight them on that issue?
Well, hey, Jen, along those lines, how do you keep your services in line with the policy? Do you think about that as you're working and thinking, wow, this might not be covered, or it's not your responsibility, obviously. You're trying to respond to this. How involved is your work in looking at the policy and figuring out what aspect of your work is covered? It's a very special skill.
None. We don't get involved in coverage. We don't do it. And look, we understand that insurance is a key stakeholder in the incident response process, but we're being engaged by the organization experiencing the incident. What we are doing is we are coming in to provide them counsel as they investigate and respond to the event. That's our role. So we aren't looking at the policy. We aren't getting involved in the coverage discussions, and that's between the broker, the policyholder, and the carrier.
Okay, before we get to the next question, which is what you do when you get the call, we have a question from the audience I want to get to. Here it comes. Do most carriers provide some sort of decision-making matrix that organizations can refer to during a ransomware event to prevent jeopardizing coverage? I don't know the answer to that question. Does anyone have an answer to that one?
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, Joni and Jen, I'm certain have significantly higher volume, but whenever I've seen it, it's in the mindset of the adjuster to how they think that the coverage applies and whether they think that the decision to pay is reasonable or not. And then also if they're getting somebody whispering in their ear in the form of outside coverage counsel saying yay or nay.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say I'm not aware of any matrix, but I know if, back to my recommendation of talking to the carrier before you experience an incident to understand how the claims process is going to go and what's going to be considered by the carriers. They do their coverage analysis. That's going to be a really helpful way to get into the mind of the carrier. They're not hiding the ball and waiting for the aha moment. They'll talk to you about that. They actually prefer that you talk to them about it so that it's also less work on their part when they have to come in and say, oh my gosh, you've engaged this firm not on panel. You've engaged that firm not on panel. Have that discussion beforehand. But a written matrix that they hand out to their policyholders, I personally have never seen one. I don't know if Joni has.
Yeah, Joni, what are your thoughts on payments in general? What is your experience with those kinds of situations?
So I haven't seen a written matrix from carriers either, but from the broker's perspective, we try to go through with the client. I mean, I have had clients say to me, and, tell me what the steps. So if we have an event, what do I need to do? Can you lay that out for us? And we have that conversation with them, and we make recommendations from the insurance adjuster's perspective. Most carriers that have, the bigger carriers that have cyber insurance adjusters, they're pretty specialized, right? That's all they do. So they've seen a lot of these, and sometimes they can actually be pretty helpful for clients, that are kind of in the dark. But again, there's certain things that need to happen. The first thing an event happens, you got to call the hotline. I mean, most of the time these events happen on a Friday night or over the weekend, holiday weekend. So have that hotline number, call, get your breach coach engaged. And then the breach coach really is, helpful in getting together the team that you need to respond to the event. So, like I said, there's no written matrix, but I think the cyber adjusters are always very willing to get on a phone call, and walk through. And if that's something that, it is something that clients should ask their brokers. And if need be, ask to get on a call with the carrier as well.
Scott, are the adjusters typically represented by counsel as well?
More and more frequently they are. And we're seeing more and more frequently the responsibilities of adjusting the claim, investigating the claim, handling the claim goes to outside law firms. There are a couple of law firms in the US that do all the work, or a huge amount of work for different US and London carriers. And so it's a pretty remarkable thing, right? Which is an insurance policy is supposed to be easy to read and easy to understand with a thing, whether it's covered or it's not. Nonetheless, a law firm is brought in to do that. I mean, imagine if you had an ER visit for, a trauma situation, and you wanted to see a doctor, and they said, "Well, hang on a second, let me have you talk with our lawyers to tell them what happened."
Yeah, I worked on one where the adjusters council handed over a 30-page questionnaire within the first week, which was a problem. What is that information, Scott? Let me ask you: is that information that the adjusters using with their counsel privileged?
It shouldn't be, and I say that because now look, the stupid lawyer answer. It depends. State law does vary a bit. I mean, New York is an interesting one in that New York has remarkable privilege law that is clear that when an outside lawyer handles the claim, that is taking over the job of an adjuster in the ordinary course of an insurance carrier's business. And as a starting point, it is not privileged. You can have a lawyer do it, but if it is ordinary course of business claim adjusting, until there's been a denial or anticipation of litigation, not privileged. And there are decisions out there, New York, Illinois, other places, Minnesota, where it makes this exact clear ruling. And so carrier's effort to say, well, I work with this law firm, and therefore you can't see it in discovery, that rule is not supposed to apply. It's not supposed to protect them until they've said no. That's
an interesting angle. Have you ever used that angle?
All the time. And I've won on it. I've gotten remarkable documents from it. I've had it in more than one case where the courts have agreed and have recognized that the use of counsel is not a way to shield what is ordinary course of business adjusting.
Are Joni's communications going to be discoverable too?
I argue yes, and I argue not discoverable. Okay. Yes, it's supposed to be privileged. No, not discoverable. I got a little turned around the first answer there, because she's working in the equivalent role of a consulting expert, and there are multiple decisions that agree with that.
But, Jen, tell me tell us all what your perfect team is when you have a big ransomware attack that comes in. It's going to require payment. It's going to require negotiation. Forensic. Tell me about all the different groups that you're going to work with, and how you manage privilege, and how you manage insurance. Well, you're not going to be managing the insurance issues directly, but how those issues are going to come up.
Yeah. So when we have a ransomware matter coming in, we are speaking to the organization. We're trying to get a high level understanding of what they know about the incident. We always tell organizations, don't wait to call us until you think you have a good summary of what exactly happened, because we need to be involved as early as possible to get the right people involved to do what we need to be done to investigate and respond to the incident. So when we have a ransomware event come in, we're going to be bringing in a forensic investigation firm. They're going to be supporting the investigation into the incident to really put a box around the network intrusion and ultimate encryption for dealing with ransomware with encryption event that happened. And sometimes the forensic firm also offers negotiation and payment services. So threat actor communications and negotiations with them, and then actual payment of ransoms to the threat actors. So sometimes they're one-stop shop. Sometimes they also offer restoration services, which we may need assistance in rebuilding the systems or bringing the systems back online. Other times, those services are across several different organizations. Somebody else we're bringing in very early on is law enforcement. So we bring law enforcement in. They're supporting the investigation. They're giving us helpful information that we need for our investigation. They may ask for some information to support their own investigation into cybercrime as well. And we sometimes get to the conclusion of a forensic investigation and determine that there's actually no reporting that's necessary. So we don't need to report the incident out to anybody. Other times that's not the case. So if we're looking at having to notify individuals, we may be bringing in a firm to provide the notification services, to mail the letters, to operate the call center, to offer credit monitoring and identity restoration services that may be offered. And throughout the entire life cycle of a ransomware event, we're also possibly looking at the engagement of public relations to assist in messaging regarding the incident, media monitoring, and communications regarding the incident as well.
Okay. All right. So that's quite a lot of workflow. Joni, this is a bit of a loaded question. Can you tell, is that typically the kind of coverage that you've seen in advocating for claims for your customers? Can all those work streams be covered in a good cyber insurance policy?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, assuming that the client does retain the pre-approved counsel, and there's breach coaches, and you know, I know Jennifer works with almost like all of the carriers in her firm, and the client is still the breach coach's client, the policyholder is their client, but in working with these pre-approved counsel, there is a level of trust with the carriers because they've already vetted those law firms and they've vetted the vendors. So they do have a level of trust. So, you know, when that happens, I mean, that is what's supposed to happen, is that the breach coach comes in, they retain all of those experts that are, you know, on the pre-approved list, and then keeping the carrier informed, like in real time. I mean, that's really what they're looking for. They want to be informed real time of what's going on, and there should be coverage, you know, barring some other, you know, unforeseen issue or exclusion that's on the particular policy. But that is typically how it should be, seamless like that, right? So once you know, somebody like Jennifer comes in, they kind of like manage it, and also helps to manage the privilege by the law firm retaining all of the experts instead of the client going out and just doing it on their own.
Scott, where are the gaps that people make, the mistakes that companies make when you do your gap insurance? You know, it's one of the services you offer, which is to come in and tell everybody where the gaps of insurance that they have. Where do you find these things? Where do you find it most necessary that they should have endorsements? And why don't you explain what an endorsement is?
Yeah. So insurance policies, carrier counsel would say, these are contracts, and therefore we're stuck with that. They are, but they're not. They're not contracts in the way that business people and in-house counsel think of them. It's not an agreement where each side sits down with a clean sheet of paper or some form that they really like, and they go back and forth over a period of time to reach a happy landing point where each side has weighed in and concluded what the draft should have. Nope. These are off-the-shelf, pre-printed forms that the cyber insurance carriers offer, and either you buy it or you don't. But as to endorsements, those are changes that can be made to the policy. Again, almost always some form of printed, pre-approved forms that get added into the policy. And so insurance is like living in 1701 rather than 2024, where you say, okay, well, we're going to show you the final document with all the changes in the document. Rather, you get the pre-printed form, and then you'll get a handful of endorsements, and ideally the broker helps get more and better endorsements to expand the coverage or eliminate restrictions or be tailored to the business. And they say things like section Roman 5.A.3. Romanet is removed and replaced with the following language. And so then when you read an insurance policy, you're almost better off starting at the end and striking through the language that was removed, because you have to look at both pages at the same time, which means I end up using two 27-inch monitors when reading insurance policy to have the basic form open and the endorsements open on a separate window to figure out what was changed.
Right.
And so you're circling back to the other part of your question is, what do you ask for? Cyber insurance policies have gotten better, but there are certainly still places where people can ask for more and ask for different things. Paying attention to are there limitations in terms of total amount of coverage available for certain types of events? Something that has been rolled out in the industry is there used to be coverage for a business interruption claim where it was a cyber attack, but what if you have some kind of system failure that's not based on a cyber attack? Better policies include system failure coverage, which is not tied to a cyber attack, but some kind of technology event that takes your system down and has the exact same effect.
Okay.
And other things along those lines where it is a circumstance where either the policyholder or more likely the broker has to know that that's an offering from the carrier, has to ask for it, and has to hope the carrier agrees to provide it.
Okay, that's great. We got another question from the audience. I'm going to start with Jennifer, and then I'll turn it to Scott and Joni. It's kind of a two-part question. So, Jennifer, what steps do you take to ensure that proper security is now in place to minimize the risk of occurrence, to minimize the risk of another ransomware attack from that attacker or another ransomware attack from somebody different? And then turning to Scott and Joni, what are the insurers insuring for after the incident typically? So we'll start with Jen and make this kind of a two-part thing. So what do you look at for that final phase? How does it work what's your calculus?
Yeah, so the forensic investigation, that's going to be naturally part of it because containment is an effort. We need to ensure we're containing the event. Well, how do we contain the event? By identifying the holes and plugging them. So you're plugging the holes to hopefully prevent something like that from happening again. But throughout the life cycle of the forensic investigation, they may say, oh, you had MFA here, but you didn't have it here. Oh, you should, block this here and block that there. So there's some information that comes out of the forensic investigation that supports containment and potential prevention of events in the future.
And well, how much of that? So is that typically handled by one forensic firm, or is it? Did you say you're going to use a remediation firm? Has that service been covered by everybody nowadays, or is it more something that's specialized along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes the forensic firm is directing the remediation firm and saying, this is what we've done, this is what we've identified needs to be done, so please take these steps. Other times, the remediation firm may come in and be providing helpful guidance like that throughout their work on the event too.
Okay. What about the double cross? What do you think? How do you advise your clients when they're worried that, hey, we're going to make this payment and it's just going to happen again? It came up on that. I'm always forgetting the name of that TV show with Jennifer Aniston and the one with the two anchor people.
The morning show.
Morning show, yeah. They had a ransomware attack on that show, and they had a big debate in the boardroom about payment. And it's like, what's to stop them from coming back and asking for more? And then I want to hear the insurance angle to that. So I don't know how you handle that, Jen, but you probably have some sort of algorithm in your brain there that you put to work.
Yeah. So, look, there's no guarantee when an organization decides they're going to pursue payment of the ransom. There's no guarantee making that payment is going to result in the threat actor being good to their word. And what is their word? Providing the decryption tool if they need it, promise to delete data, promise to identify exactly how they got into the system, and Scout's honor they're not going to attack you again. But there's really no way that we can guarantee that they're going to take all of those steps. So what do we do? Well, we've got our own intelligence on the different threat actors, and we're working with the forensic firms, the communications firms that have their own intelligence as well. That's one of the benefits of having the panel firms that are prepared by the carriers, because these are firms that are actually going to know what to do. I had a matter come in a few weeks ago where the organization had insurance, didn't tender a claim, went out, engaged a firm to do the forensic investigation and negotiation. That firm was not on the carrier's panel. And then they let their broker know this event happened. And they said, all right, you got to talk to counsel. We know Mullen Coughlin's approved with your counsel. Have a conversation with them. So we get involved, and I talked to the negotiation firm. I said, okay, how many active events have you had with this threat actor? 2. okay, what are the stats for those two matters? And one was no payment was made. The other one, they got the threat actor to reduce their initial demand by 50%. So I said, that's awesome. We've had 95 matters with this threat actor. So let's look at our payment stats. And the payment stats were that you could get a greater reduction from the demand to the final number that the threat actor would take. And when the matter came into us, the initial demand was $2 million. The negotiation firm got it down to $1 million and said to the client, we got 50%. We knew we were going to get 50%, make the payment. And I said, time out, because we have different data and it tells us that we could get the threat actor down to somewhere between 350 and 425. So the client said, I mean, they weren't happy with it. They said, we just want to make the payment and make this go away. Totally get that, understood. Let's talk through how maybe we can buy some time and save some money. You know, we're still dealing with your out-of-pocket exposures at this point because of their self-insured retention. And we got the threat actor down to $400,000. So there is negotiation there. You need to be working with the right people, and the right people are going to have intelligence on who are those threat actors that don't make good on their word, don't make good on their promises. Because you're going to talk about that when you're counseling them on whether or not payment should be a viable option for them. But in looking at all of the different ransomware matters that we've had, most of our clients do not pay the ransom. So last year, our stat was 15% of our ransomware clients paid the ransom. We had, I think, 800 ransomware matters last year. We see a double cross very infrequently. And it may be a different threat actor group reaches out and says, we have your data. And they show us data, and it's the exact data that the original threat actor told us. We may have a threat actor say, okay, I'll reduce the demand, and then say, oh, you know what? Yeah, so we'll give you the key, but we're actually not going to delete the data unless you pay the rest of the original demand. But it's infrequent. It happens, but it's infrequent. And working with the right people with that intelligence will allow the victim organization to make an informed decision on whether or not payment's going to be made. Okay,
so that's incredible. Joni, the client wants to rebuild infrastructure, like this questioner asks. How much is it going to depend on their insurance policy, and what are some caveats there when you want to make sure you're covered for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% going to depend upon the policy, right? So some policies will include coverage for that, and some don't. So that's something that you should be having that conversation with your broker, again, really early on, to figure out what your needs are, and also looking at your systems and you know, making sure that they're up to date and in compliance with what the carriers are going to ask for in the renewal questions.
Mm-hmm. Well, this comes to the next question, which is the person calls it betterment. The client was breached, forensic process is happening, client needs to rebuild infrastructure, like I mentioned. They're not comfortable using old equipment. Everything new is going to be better. Can you have coverage, Scott, that will provide for, you know, brand new laptops or brand new network systems, even though you could make an argument that the current systems are okay because the forensics people feel like they've cleaned everything up?
Yes, and
use the opportunity, right, to better all their systems, and let's get the insurance company to pay for it.
Yes and yes. So there is coverage called betterment, which will have explicit language, depending upon the carrier, talking about increased cost, other things. I have fights on the regular where an adjuster or better said their outside counsel has decided that anything done is simply, oh, you're just buying a luxury new system. You're super happy you get to replace the system on the carrier's dime. That's not appropriate. But to the points that you were making and that Jen's making, Joni's making, so much of the effort that goes on is part of the process of ensuring the attacker is out. And so when you said double cross coming back, a lot of times there is the risk that the attacker, you thought that they were out, the insured thought that they were out, and the attacker is still in there. It's going to relaunch. I know of a story where everyone thought the attacker was out, the system was being rebuilt by an IT person, and as that person was rebuilding, systems were being taken offline because the attacker wasn't fully removed. And so then what is considered containment, remediation, and what does an aggressive adjuster say? Well, that's just an upgrade. So if you have betterment in the policy, that should give a more direct path to saying, okay, this is something that we anticipated providing. It's written out how we'll do it. If it's not in the policy, it's also a conversation of how are we looking at this? We come in and say, oh, we need all new stuff. expect an adjuster to come back and say, well, we're not going to pay for you to just throw out your old system and get a new, better one. That's not what we do. But and then the real answer should be somewhere in between, which is all this is part of the containment and restoration process. And even though we got new machines, it was because we couldn't guarantee that the old ones could actually be cleaned, or couldn't do it in a way that would result in less lost income, less extra expense to us compared to using the old machines and trying to rebuild from scratch.
Okay, we've just got a couple minutes left. I want each of you to cover this last topic, which is a really complex one. So I'll start with Jen. What about third parties, right? There's data held by vendors, cloud providers. Why don't you explain, Jen, just the challenge of those issues, and then I want to hear from Scott and Joni as to how you can cover for those issues.
Yeah, vendor risk is a huge risk that really every organization has exposure to, because every organization is relying upon some other organization for some piece of their infrastructure, their data support, their data collection. And when that vendor experiences an incident, it's the data owner's problem. So yes, it happened over here, except it involved the security of your data and you actually own that data. So of course, there will be a contract between the vendor and the data owner, and that contract may speak to who's providing the notifications, who's putting the bill for the notifications, things like that. But the data owner needs to take their own steps to understand, is what the vendor telling me all the information that I need to ensure I'm taking the steps that I need to further secure my system if there was something involving their system, but also just to really understand what the impact of my data was and what the data is that's impacted, so that I can determine if what they're offering to do for me is appropriate and what needs to be done under the laws that are applicable to me. Last year we had Move It. That was the big vendor event last year. We have well over 300 different Move It matters coming into the firm. Only a handful of them are direct users of Move It. There's a lot of downstream clients of the direct users and downstream clients of the downstream clients of the direct users. And I will let Joni talk to the coverage that's available to the organizations under the policy. But we see insurance involved in those types of events.
So Joni, what's the story there? That's a workflow that sounds like it could cost a company in the millions, right? Then just dealing with third parties during a ransomware attack.
Yeah. So everything Jennifer said is 100% on point. There is something called dependent security failure coverage that is available to cover these kinds of losses and costs that a company may incur to mitigate loss as well. So that's something that you might want to be asking for. And as Jen mentioned as well, looking at your indemnity agreements with the vendor to see if you have indemnification from them for such losses.
Scott, who's paying and not paying when it comes to this kind of issue? And, there's so many workflow. Again, you have the SEC investigating, you have the FBI interaction, you've got all your vendors now calling you and they want briefings. And then you've all of a sudden got disputes with those vendors. You've all of a sudden got litigation with those vendors. Are you covered or are you not covered? If you've been responsible, are you?
A super well-crafted cyber insurance policy should cover all the costs of figuring this out, containing it, and starting to work there. If/when there are third parties coming in and saying, you owe me, you're responsible, you're liable for this, best practice, turning to the insurance carrier and saying, here's what's come in, what do I do? Tell me how it's covered and how to be handled. And working with the adjuster to say, here's where we are, have an expectation that the adjuster will say, I recognize that these are business partners, but we've got to figure out your potential liability, your potential damages, and here's how we evaluate it. But ideally, again, third-party liability coverage applies in that circumstance.
Okay, we've got about a minute left. Joni, with respect to documentation, is there one failure of documentation before we say goodbye to everyone that you would want, that you've seen it, you say, wow, I wish this claimant had just done this, but they didn't, and now I don't have the best news for them? Anything comes to mind?
Yeah, no, I don't know how to answer that, but I think the theme that I have really is knowing what you're, having. I even tell my clients, have a hard copy of the insurance policy, have a hard copy of the 1-800 numbers,
right.
and the pre-approved vendors, and making sure also that your IT people and vet those breach counsel, vet those firms in advance before you ever have an event at all. That's the best preparation that you could actually have.
Right, right. And fortunately, there are a lot of great lawyers who can manage this, including one on this panel, Jen, and lots of others. Bruce, I could see you're on the screen ready to say goodbye. The time went by too quickly. All three of you, I love the dynamic here that we had different angles, different perspectives, almost like a prism to sort of view these ransomware attacks from the insurance perspective. I can't thank the three of you enough. And I think we got it all in there, Bruce, as best we could. And thanks to the audience, because we got some great questions. I think I got most of them, and really, really enjoyed it.
Did get some great questions. There's also some interesting comments in the chat, John. I don't know if you've been following along, but very complimentary of your introductory skills. Let's just put it that way.